welcome to Edison Open House Transport Futures 2021. In this session, we're going to be focusing on the work of Ballard Power Systems, a company that develops and manufactures fuel cell products for a very wide range of applications. And with me is its CEO and President, Randy McEwen. Randy, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start with some of the basics. What kind of fuel cells are you involved in and what kind of applications?
So Ballard designs and manufactures fuel cell engines based on what's called proton exchange membrane or PEM fuel cell technology. So we design and manufacture fuel cell engines for medium and heavy duty motive applications of bus, truck, rail, and marine. And there are three key reasons we focus on these markets. The first is that the value propositions for fuel cells are strongest where vehicles have heavy payload, long daily range requirements, high utilization, and a need for fast refueling. The second is that these are applications or use cases that typically feature return to base or depot refueling. So think about transit buses that come back to base, or regional haul trucks that come back to a depot, or a train coming back to a station, or marine vessels coming back to port. You can have centralized refueling and you don't need to have a distributed refueling infrastructure. And the third reason, and this is really important to everyone at Ballard, is that these are applications that typically disproportionately contribute to emissions, but to date have been very difficult to abate. So as an illustrative example, in North America, 10% of all on-road vehicles are buses and commercial trucks, yet they disproportionately contribute a third of GHG emissions and a whopping 2/3 of NOx and PM 2.5.
Now, the use of battery power in vehicles is accelerating and batteries are getting better all the time. Why do you believe that fuel cells are so critical? I mean, obviously there's a place for fuel cells in connection with bigger vehicles with heavier payloads and, as you've said, that come back to base. But do you think battery technology is going to supplant fuel cells or the other way around?
So what we see is a future where you have both pathways for electrification, battery electrification and fuel cell electrification. And where you have light vehicles that have short daily range requirements, low utilization, and have lots of time to recharge, battery electric vehicles are very compelling. By contrast, where you have the heavier vehicles, longer range, high daily utilization requirements, and the need for fast refueling, fuel cells are very compelling. So we see complementary technologies that, by the way, are using the same driveline. They're using batteries in both applications, just not as much batteries in fuel cells, and both using electric motors as well. It's really about how you store the energy. Is it stored in a battery or stored in hydrogen in a tank? So we see these two pathways for electrification as highly complementary.
One of the things we're seeing is that adoption of electrification is greatly speeded by government policy. Where are you seeing the impact of policy in speeding things up across the various territories in which you're involved?
So it's a great question. We've seen a lot of examples in the solar industry, in the wind industry, and even in battery technology, the catalyst that regulation and policy support can play. So what we're seeing now, and this has been a sea change over the last 24 months, is today we have 75 countries with carbon pricing initiatives. Today we have 50 countries with net zero carbon targets, typically by 2050. And today there are 32 countries that have hydrogen strategies and roadmaps, identifying hydrogen as a key plank for decarbonization. We also see policies that are looking at emissions regulations. So for example, in California, there's the Clean Truck Standards that requires all classes of trucks starting in 2024 to have a certain portion of those classes of trucks zero emission, not low emission, but zero emission, and scaling up to 40 to 75% of those classes of trucks by 2035 and 100% by 2045. Similarly, in California, there's a policy called the ICT that requires all new transit buses, again, to be zero emission by 2029, and 50% of new transit buses to be zero emission starting in 2025. As we move to Europe, There's a policy in Europe that requires the heaviest trucks to reduce carbon emissions, GHG emissions, effectively by 15% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. In China, there are policies to adopt 1 million fuel cell electric vehicles by 2030, with a very significant emphasis on commercial trucks and buses. So there's a very significant policy network globally, and a particularly strong policy now in Europe with a number of countries: France, Germany, Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, Spain, Portugal, the UK. All these countries have programs in place for the adoption of clean green hydrogen, typically in the range of $8 to $10 billion of investment between now and 2030. So there's a lot of policies in place that will support the adoption of zero-emission vehicles, and particularly hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. The last point I want to comment on policy is that one policy I would love government to implement globally is a global carbon tax. So a price on CO2, currently it's around $40, $50 or euros per carbon ton equivalent. Moving to 100 or even higher will really help to accelerate the adoption of zero-emission technologies.
You've made a very convincing case for fuel cells for the larger trucks and many other bigger applications. Convince us that actually Ballard are the right fuel cells to use in those fuel cell applications.
Yeah, so Ballard has been at this a long time, and fuel cell technology is like three-dimensional chess. It's very complicated. It takes a sustained investment over many years to prove out fuel cell technology, and we've done that. And so let me give you an illustrative example. In the bus and commercial truck market, today in Europe and North America, Ballard has about 85+% market share. In China, around 45 to 50% market share. So today we have around 3,400 fuel cell buses and commercial trucks with Ballard technology inside on roads, delivering goods, delivering people. And those vehicles cumulatively now have traveled 75 million kilometers. So enough to circle the globe about 1,800 times. And so what we're showing is that our technology has the reliability and, importantly, the durability. Ballard uniquely has designed our fuel cell technology for these medium and heavy-duty motive applications that require between 25 and 30, 40,000, even 50,000 hours of durability. By contrast, a number of the other players that are moving into these markets have developed their fuel cell technology for the automotive passenger car market. There, the demands on reliability and durability are 5,000 to 10,000 hours of durability. So we have a step change already proven in the field, not an idea, not on test, but proven in the field only at Ballard.
How much success has Ballard had in penetrating the market elsewhere?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that we're literally at the first second of a 24-hour day in terms of market adoption. So in the bus and truck market, as I mentioned, 3,400 vehicles in the field. In the rail market, we have today about 6 projects underway where we have the world's only operating fuel cell tram line based on the Gaoming line in the city of Foshan in Guangdong province, China. 5 trains operating since December of 2019. We have a train development program in Europe with Siemens and a number of other train programs, both for the transport of goods as well as for the transport of people. In the marine market, we now have about 10 different projects we're engaged, and we're very excited about both the rail and marine markets as markets that I think will surprise to the upside. So again, the first second of a 24-hour day in terms of market adoption, and these markets in aggregate, bus, truck, rail, and marine, we quantify as about $130 billion of addressable market in terms of the sale of engines to these applications in 2030.
You've developed a recent partnership with Weichai. How does that help you accelerate penetration of the market?
So it's a great question. One of the things we really wanted to do at Ballard strategically is to focus on being in the powertrain segment of the value chain, so a tier 1 supplier to a number of OEMs. And we thought that it was critically important to pair up and have strategic relationships with companies that are in that part of the value chain and have experience with high volume production, with scale, with supply chain muscle, and critically important, series production with cost reduction every year. And so in China, we've partnered up with Weichai. Weichai's made a strategic equity investment in Ballard. They just own more than 15% of Ballard. We also have a joint venture where we have a fuel cell stack and module production facility in China. Now it's up and operational with 2 gigawatts of fuel cell production, the largest production facility in the world for fuel cell engines for the commercial truck and bus market. It can produce around 34,000 stacks and around 20,000 engines per year to service 20,000 vehicles per year. And so with Weichai, that platform is to sell and market fuel cell engines to the bus OEMs and the commercial truck OEMs in China. Now, Weichai is a diesel engine giant, so they manufacture over 1 million diesel engines per year. And they have relationships with all of these key accounts in the bus and truck market. And they also, within the Weichai group, have a number of captive truck and bus OEMs that they own. So it's a very compelling partnership for us in China with Weichai. Similarly, if you move to Europe, we have a strategic collaboration with Mahle, where we're looking to co-develop a fuel cell engine for the commercial truck market. Again, Mahle has high volume production, has scale, supply chain muscle, and relationships with all the key accounts. An interesting fact about Mahle, 50%, half of all vehicles on road today globally have a Mahle component inside. So a very strong partner for us there. And as we move to North America, in the light duty vehicle market, particularly for cargo vans, we have a similar industrial collaboration with Linamar, a great Canadian company that is a tier 1 supplier. And together we're developing a fuel cell solution for the light duty vehicle market.
Now, one area of transportation that you haven't mentioned yet is aviation. Have you got any ambitions in that market?
So the aviation market is actually quite fascinating. What we're seeing is the future of aerospace does require significant investment to decarbonize. It is a more challenging segment to address, in my opinion. But what we do see is that particularly urban air applications, urban mobility applications, like, for example, flying taxis from the airport to the downtown cores, the size of those type of urban air mobility or aerospace applications will be very similar to the types of module size or engine size we're developing for other markets, like the commercial truck, like the rail, like the marine market. So we see a lot of overlap. And part of our strategy, critically important, is to have the same core competencies, the same technology, and in a significant part of the bill of materials of the same engines apply across multiple end market applications. So that way, not only do we have the highest performing technology, but with volume across multiple markets, we also have a cost advantage. So we do see an opportunity in the aerospace market, but I think that market will come later. So where our near-term focus clearly is on these medium and heavy-duty motive markets, bus, truck, rail, and marine.
Now, Randy, we've been asking all our guests on Edison Open House to tell us what they think the future of transport is. How do you envisage the future?
This is a great question. Actually, if you go back 100 years and see what happened and how disruptive the introduction of internal combustion engine vehicles were, we went from horse buggies, effectively, to a paradigm where you had cars, buses, trucks, powered by internal combustion engines, fueled by gasoline and diesel. And you had roads and highways built out. You had fueling stations and service stations. You had accidents and insurance. You had air pollution and emissions policy. And this whole paradigm has effectively remained unchanged for 100 years until now. And what we see going forward is the trends with autonomy and connectivity and electrification and shared mobility, as we see transport being safer, much lower cost, and zero emission. And of course, this is a zero emission part that addresses the existential threat of climate change. So as we look to 2030, as we look to 2050, we see a transition away from internal combustion engines to zero emission mobility. This we will call mobility's second great transformation.
And you are in the sector of the market, which is, I think, going to expand, which is the shared ownership. Buses and public transport vehicles, because we mustn't forget the other side of the equation, that you can have zero emissions, but actually the manufacture of cars is not carbon neutral. So will continue to be a big issue. So perhaps we are moving towards that shared ownership future.
Yeah, I do think in the passenger car market, you're going to see this paradigm shift where the next generation doesn't want to own a car. It's more consuming transportation as a service. And in that environment, you're talking now about vehicles that have high utilization, long daily range requirements, and a need for fast refueling, all of which favor fuel cell technology.
Randy McKeown, we're utterly convinced of your vision of the future as you explain it. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you very much. For Ballard, as we kind of look to the future, we do see this pathway to pass on to the next generation a more sustainable planet. We plan to play a very major role.